She had learned over the years to sit at the edges of rooms rather than their centers, not because she lacked presence, but because presence, for a woman like her, was rarely welcomed unless it came wrapped in obedience. From an early age, she understood that her value was measured quietly through patience, restraint, and how little discomfort she caused others. Love, she believed, was something granted to women who were softer, younger, and more willing to bend. Her name was Eliza Hartwell, and she lived in a house that had once been lively with ambition, but had long since settled into careful survival. The Hartwell estate was not grand, though it carried the dignity of age. Its floors creaked with memory rather than neglect, and its walls held the echoes of conversations spoken in lowered voices. Respectability was the family's most guarded possession, for fortune had not been kind enough to remain. Eliza was the eldest daughter. That fact alone shaped her fate more than any flaw ever could. By the time she reached an age when society began to watch her closely, she had already learned to step aside for her younger sisters, to manage the household with quiet efficiency, and to accept that admiration would pass her by as naturally as sunlight favors open windows. She did not resent this, not openly. Resentment, after all, was a luxury reserved for those with options. Yet beneath her composure lived a sharp, observant mind. Eliza noticed everything. She noticed the way her mother's shoulders stiffened when visitors were announced without warning. She noticed how invitations had grown fewer, how conversations now revolved around caution rather than opportunity. And she noticed, more than anything, how her own opinions were politely ignored, as though acknowledging them might disrupt the fragile balance holding their world together. The evening that would alter everything began like any other. A modest dinner was planned, nothing elaborate. A family acquaintance was expected, no more. Eliza had overseen the preparations with her usual calm, ensuring the table was set neatly. The food prepared with care rather than extravagance. She wore a simple gown, appropriate and unremarkable, chosen not to draw attention but to avoid criticism. It was only when the carriage arrived, larger, finer, unmistakably aristocratic, that unease stirred in her chest. The name, when announced, carried weight that filled the room before the man himself ever entered. Duke Nathaniel Ashford was not expected. He was not invited. His presence was an intrusion cloaked in civility, and everyone knew it. Conversations stopped. Smiles were summoned hastily, like armor pulled on too late. The Duke entered with the ease of someone accustomed to commanding attention without asking for it. His manner was polished, his expression unreadable, and his confidence unmistakable. He greeted the family with courtesy that bordered on indulgence, as though this visit were a favor rather than an imposition. Eliza observed him silently, as she always did. She noticed the way he surveyed the room, not rudely, but with a practiced assessment that suggested ownership was never far from his thoughts. She noticed how her mother's voice softened unnaturally when she spoke to him, how her father straightened, eager to appear competent in the presence of power. The Duke's gaze passed over Eliza at first, lingering briefly before moving on. That, too, was familiar. She felt the quiet relief of invisibility settle over her shoulders, though it carried with it an old, familiar ache. Dinner began under a veil of strained politeness. The Duke spoke easily, confidently, making observations that assumed agreement rather than invited it. He spoke of land, of alliances, of expectations, topics that hovered uncomfortably close to the Hartwells' vulnerabilities. Eliza listened, her expression composed, her thoughts increasingly unsettled. There was something in his tone that unsettled her more than his words. Not cruelty, not even arrogance alone, but certainty. The certainty that his presence was justified, that his opinions carried authority regardless of who they affected. It was the voice of a world that made decisions for people like her without ever asking how those decisions would be born. As the meal progressed, conversation turned, as it so often did, toward the future, toward prospects, toward what must be done for the good of the family. Eliza felt the familiar tightening in her chest as her role was discussed in her absence. Though she sat at the table, she had grown used to this subtle erasure, the way plans formed around her life without ever acknowledging her will. Normally she would have remained silent. Silence had kept the peace for years, but that evening something shifted. Perhaps it was the Duke's offhand remark, delivered with a smile that assumed compliance. Perhaps it was the cumulative weight of years spent being agreeable. Or perhaps it was the quiet realization that nothing would change unless someone, finally, spoke. Eliza set down her fork. The sound was small, but it carried. The Duke turned toward her, surprised, his attention sharpening as though he were only now noticing her fully. The table stilled. Every breath seemed to pause, suspended between expectation and dread. When Eliza spoke, her voice was calm, not raised, not trembling. Calm in a way that demanded listening. She did not accuse, she did not insult. She simply stated what no one else had dared to say, that decisions made without regard for the person who must live with them were not acts of generosity, but control disguised as concern. The room seemed to tilt. Her mother inhaled sharply. Her father stared as though he were seeing his daughter for the first time, and the Duke, so certain of his authority, watched her with an expression that was no longer indulgent, but alert. Eliza felt no triumph, only clarity, a strange, steady clarity that told her she had crossed a threshold from which there would be no quiet return. Whatever consequences followed, silence would no longer be her refuge. She had not spoken to challenge a duke. She had spoken to reclaim herself, and in doing so, she had unknowingly set into motion a reckoning far greater than a single dinner could contain. Eliza did not wait to be dismissed. If she had, she might have faltered under the weight of their stares. She might have allowed the familiar rhythm of obedience to pull her back into place, to smooth over what she had disrupted. But the moment the words left her mouth, she understood something with unsettling certainty. Silence would not save her anymore. She rose from the table with a composure that felt almost unnatural, the chair scraping against the floor, loud enough to sound like accusation. Crystal glasses trembled slightly. Someone's breath caught. Someone else murmured her name as if it were a warning. Her mother's eyes flashed with panic. Her father's expression hardened into something sharp and wounded, as though Eliza's defiance had embarrassed him more than any stranger ever could. But it was the Duke who held her attention. Nathaniel Ashford watched her with a stillness that made him seem carved from the same stone as the manor walls. No outrage, no laughter, no immediate dismissal. Just that steady, assessing gaze that made Eliza feel as though she had stepped into a private arena and discovered she was not alone. "Young women often mistake conviction for wisdom," the Duke said, his voice measured, almost calm. Eliza did not blink. "And men often mistake control for virtue," she replied, just as measured. Her father's hand struck the table. Eliza. The single word carried a lifetime of authority. A command. A reminder. A threat dressed as parental concern. Eliza dipped her chin, not in apology, but in acknowledgement that she had heard him. Then she turned and left. She walked through the corridor as though she had been trained for it, shoulders back, steps steady. She did not run. Running would have made her look guilty. Running would have made her look like a girl caught being insolent. She was not a girl. She reached the garden before the tremor in her hands betrayed her. The night air was warm, heavy with summer roses and freshly watered earth. Lantern light flickered across hedges trimmed into obedient shapes. Somewhere inside, Laughter resumed in forced little bursts, as though the household was desperate to pretend nothing had happened. Eliza stared into the darkness beyond the hedgerow and felt her lungs finally fill properly. Her anger was not theatrical. It was clean, bright, and exhausting. She had watched too many women smile while being cornered. She had watched her own mother soften into submission whenever a man of rank entered the room. She had watched her sister fold herself smaller each year, as though invisibility might protect her from being chosen like an object. And tonight, that choice had arrived wearing a ducal title and an expression of entitlement. Footsteps sounded on the path behind her. Eliza turned, expecting her mother, perhaps, or her father coming to deliver consequences. Instead, it was her sister. Vivian stood at the garden entrance, wrapped in a shawl she did not need. The fabric clung to her as though it were armor. Her face, usually composed in that careful way society rewarded, looked fragile now, as if the dinner had cracked something that had been held together by habit alone. "Eliza," Vivian said softly. Eliza's throat tightened. "I'm sorry," Eliza blurted, the words tumbling out before she could filter them into something more graceful. "I shouldn't have. I made it worse. I know I did." Vivian crossed the path quickly and took Eliza's hands, fingers cold despite the warm night. "You didn't make it worse," Vivian said. She tried to smile, but it trembled at the edges. "You made it real." That sentence landed heavier than any reprimand. Eliza stared at her sister's face and saw what she had been trying not to see for months. Not just fear, grief. The kind of grief that comes when something precious is being taken while everyone calls it duty. "Then why are you letting this happen?" Eliza whispered. Vivian's eyes shone in the lantern light. "Because I don't know how to stop it without ruining everyone," she said, and there was no self-pity in her tone. Only weariness. "Father has already decided. Mother will not oppose him, and if I refuse," she swallowed, "if I refuse, I become the scandal. I become the selfish daughter who refused to save her family." Eliza's jaw clenched. "And what about you?" she demanded. "What about your life?" Vivian's gaze dropped to their joined hands. "My life," she echoed faintly, as if the concept were abstract. "It has always belonged to the family, hasn't it?" Eliza wanted to argue, to deny it, to insist her sister deserved more than inherited sacrifice. But Vivian's voice continued, quiet and heartbreaking in its steadiness. "There is someone else," Vivian admitted. Eliza's breath caught, though she had suspected. "His name is Caleb Turner," Vivian said. "He isn't titled, he isn't powerful, he is simply good." The word good was spoken the way one might speak a prayer. "He asked Father," Vivian went on, "properly, respectfully. He offered what he could, a small estate, a respectable name, a future built on affection." Her mouth tightened. "Father called it sentimental nonsense." Eliza's nails bit into her palms. "And now," Vivian whispered, "now I'm meant to marry a duke who looks at people as if they are acquisitions." Eliza could not stop the sharpness that rose in her. "You don't have to do this." Vivian looked up. She tried to smile again, and it nearly broke Eliza to see it. "What choice do I have?" The question was not dramatic. It was practical. If she refused, she would be cut off. If she ran, Caleb would be ruined along with her. If she fought, she would destroy the very people she was trained to protect. Society had built the walls well. Eliza's voice softened. "How long have you loved him?" Vivian's eyes filled. 3 years, she admitted. 3 years of stolen walks, careful letters, and promises whispered as though love itself was a crime. Eliza's throat burned. "And you're going to say goodbye?" Eliza said, more statement than question. Vivian nodded. "They're insisting on a courtship," she said, voice tightening. 2 months at his estate before anything is announced. His mother wants appearances. My parents want assurances." Vivian's lips trembled. "And I asked for those 2 months." Eliza understood instantly, not to fall in love with the Duke, to grieve the man she already loved. Vivian squeezed her hands, desperate now. "That's why I came out here," she said. "Eliza, please, come with me." Eliza blinked. "What?" "As my companion," Vivian said quickly, as if she feared Eliza might refuse before she finished. "I can't go there alone. I can't sit in that house and pretend day after day that I am content, while everything inside me is breaking." Her voice cracked. "If you're with me, I won't have to be brave every moment," she whispered. "And if there is any chance of seeing Caleb a few times before, she couldn't say the word marry. She couldn't say forever." Eliza felt her resistance rise reflexively. 2 months under the Duke's roof. 2 months close to a man whose eyes were too sharp and too calm. A man who had looked at Eliza tonight as though her defiance amused him, as though her voice had intrigued him. It sounded like a kind of captivity. But Vivian's face was pleading, and Eliza had never been able to deny her sister anything when it mattered. "Of course," Eliza said, the answer coming before her fear could fully form. Vivian exhaled shakily, relief washing over her features. "Thank you," she breathed. "Oh, Eliza, thank you." Eliza pulled her into an embrace. She felt her sister's body tense, then sag as though she had been holding herself upright through sheer will. "We'll manage this," Eliza murmured into her hair. "We'll be careful. We'll make those weeks count." Vivian nodded against her shoulder. Then, with the smallest pause, she whispered, "And please, try not to provoke him again." Eliza almost laughed. "Try," she murmured, half bitter, half incredulous. Vivian pulled back, eyes wide. "He isn't only arrogant," she warned softly. "He notices things, and after tonight—" She looked toward the house, where light still glowed through the dining room windows. "After tonight, I think he's going to notice you." Eliza's stomach tightened, because she could not deny it. In that final moment at the table, just before she left, the Duke's gaze had changed. Not dismissive, not amused, interested, and interest, Eliza knew, was far more dangerous than anger. The journey to Ashford Estate unfolded beneath a sky that seemed undecided, drifting between pale blue and gathering grey. Eliza watched the countryside pass from the carriage window, her reflection faintly visible in the glass, layered over hedgerows and distant hills. With every mile, the familiarity of home loosened its hold, replaced by a quiet awareness that something irrevocable had already begun. Vivian sat opposite her, hands folded too neatly in her lap. She had dressed carefully that morning, choosing a gown that balanced modesty with grace, as though appearance alone might protect her from what awaited. Eliza recognized the effort for what it was. Armor disguised as silk. Neither spoke much. Words felt inadequate for the weight of the next weeks, and silence, for once, did not feel like surrender. It felt like preparation. When the Ashford carriage finally slowed, the estate revealed itself not suddenly, but deliberately. Long iron gates opened without ceremony, as though the land itself expected obedience. The house rose beyond a gentle curve in the drive, vast without being ostentatious, its stone facade softened only by age and ivy. This was not a place built to impress, it was built to endure. Eliza felt the shift immediately. The air itself seemed different, heavier with expectation. Servants appeared with quiet efficiency the moment the carriage stopped. Doors opened, luggage was claimed, names were spoken with respectful precision. Vivian straightened, her expression settling into practiced composure. Then he emerged. Nathaniel Ashford descended the front steps without haste, one hand resting lightly against the stone balustrade. He wore no formal coat, only a dark waistcoat and a shirt open at the collar, as though he had dressed not for guests, but for authority. His presence altered the space around him, drawing attention without effort. His gaze went first to Vivian. "Miss Hartwell," he said, inclining his head. His tone was courteous, almost warm. I trust the journey was not too taxing. Vivian smiled, careful and restrained. Not at all, Your Grace. Then his eyes shifted. Eliza felt the moment stretch, sharpen. He looked at her as though she were not merely accompanying her sister, but arriving with intention of her own. There was no trace of the dismissal she had expected, no polite overlooking. Miss Hartwell, he said again, addressing her now, you honor my household with your presence. The words were flawless. The emphasis was not. Eliza inclined her head. You are most generous. His mouth curved slightly, as though he recognized the careful neutrality in her reply, as though he appreciated it. That unsettled her more than open disdain would have. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that felt both measured and watchful. Breakfasts were taken together, conversations polite and restrained. Vivian was treated with studied attentiveness, guided through the estate, introduced to neighbors, drawn gently into the role expected of her. Eliza, meanwhile, found herself observed, not intrusively, not openly, but she noticed how the Duke listened when she spoke, even when others did not, how his gaze lingered not on her appearance, but on her reactions, as though he were mapping something unseen. It was disconcerting. The estate itself was a world unto its own. The gardens were expansive but carefully maintained, favoring order over wild beauty. The library was vast, its shelves lined with volumes that bore the marks of frequent use rather than decoration. Eliza found solace there in the afternoons, drawn instinctively to spaces where thought was valued. It was there, among leather-bound spines and the scent of old paper, that he found her. You read as though you expect the book to argue back, the Duke remarked from the doorway. Eliza looked up, startled despite herself. And do you often observe your guests in silence? She replied. He stepped fully into the room, unbothered by the challenge. Only the interesting ones. She returned her attention to the page. Then I fear your standards are dangerously low. A brief pause. Then, to her surprise, he laughed. Not loudly, not indulgently. A quiet sound, genuine enough to unsettle her assumptions. On the contrary, he said, they are exacting. He did not leave immediately. Instead, he moved toward a nearby shelf, selecting a book with familiarity. He leaned against the table opposite her, posture relaxed but alert. You spoke plainly at dinner, he said after a moment. Most would not. Eliza closed her book carefully. Most are taught that silence is safer, she replied, and you disagree. I believe safety is often mistaken for virtue. His eyes sharpened. You realize, he said evenly, that such beliefs rarely serve women well. Eliza met his gaze without flinching. Neither does obedience masquerading as gratitude. The air between them seemed to tighten, not with hostility, but with recognition, as though two opposing certainties had collided and discovered they were evenly matched. That night, Eliza lay awake longer than she wished to admit. She thought of Vivian's forced smiles, of Caleb's absence hanging over every conversation like a ghost. She thought of the Duke's watchful presence, of the way he challenged without condescension, observed without dismissing. She did not trust him, but she could no longer pretend he was simple. The turning point came sooner than she expected. They were walking the eastern gardens, Vivian slightly ahead, distracted by a conversation with the Duke's mother. Eliza lingered behind, relieved for a moment of distance. Nathaniel slowed his pace. You are not what I expected, he said quietly. Eliza did not look at him. I doubt that troubles you. It does, he admitted. I prefer predictability. She stopped walking then, finally turning to face him. Then you should have chosen different company. His expression shifted, something thoughtful crossing his features. I did not choose you, he said. Yet here you are. And yet, Eliza replied, you keep positioning yourself beside me. He studied her in silence. "You defend your sister fiercely," he said at last. "Few do so without expectation of reward." Eliza's voice softened, though the edge remained. "She is not a bargaining tool." "No," he agreed, "she is not." The admission startled her. "I did not seek this arrangement lightly," he continued. "There are considerations you do not see." "Then enlighten me." He shook his head. "Not yet." Frustration flared. "You ask for trust," Eliza said, "but offer none in return. I ask for patience." She laughed quietly. "That, Your Grace, is what men ask for when they intend to proceed regardless." Something unreadable crossed his face. "You assume much, and you reveal little." They stood there, the garden stretching endlessly around them, as though the world itself were holding its breath. In that moment, Eliza understood something unsettling. This was no simple negotiation of power. This was a test, and she had the unnerving sense that the Duke was no longer certain who was testing whom. The first letter arrived on a morning that seemed entirely unremarkable. Eliza found it folded between the pages of a book she had not yet finished, its edges worn from frequent handling. The handwriting was familiar enough to make her heart falter before she even read the name. Caleb Turner. She closed the book at once, fingers tightening around the paper as though it might vanish if she hesitated. Letters were not forbidden at Ashford Estate, but they were never truly private either. Servants passed freely. Eyes noticed more than they admitted. Eliza retreated to the window alcove, where ivy filtered the light and the thick curtains offered the illusion of solitude. Only then did she unfold the page. The words were careful, restrained, and unmistakably full of longing. Caleb wrote of restraint and hope, of trusting Vivian's strength even as he struggled with his own. He did not ask Eliza to interfere. He did not demand loyalty beyond what decency allowed. He simply asked that she watch over her sister. Eliza pressed the letter to her chest and exhaled slowly. That afternoon, she found Vivian in the music room, seated at the pianoforte without playing. Her hands rested motionless on the keys, as though sound itself required too much courage. Vivian's eyes lifted the moment Eliza entered. "You have it," she said softly. Eliza nodded and held out the letter. Vivian took it with a reverence that bordered on grief. She read in silence, her composure cracking in small, imperceptible ways. A breath caught. A finger lingered over a line too long. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully, as though order might preserve what love could not. "He writes as if he is already saying goodbye," Vivian whispered. Eliza sat beside her. "He writes as if he wants you to survive this with dignity." Vivian smiled faintly. "He always was better than I deserved." The days that followed carried an undercurrent of secrecy. Letters arrived infrequently, carefully rooted, their presence known only to Eliza and Vivian. Each one seemed to sharpen the tension already woven into the house. Eliza became vigilant. She noticed how servants lingered near doors, how conversations ended too quickly when she entered a room, how the Duke's mother, elegant and unreadable, observed Vivian with increasing scrutiny. And she noticed how the Duke noticed everything. It was during one such moment of vigilance that Eliza realized they were no longer alone in their quiet defiance. She was returning from the garden when she heard voices near the study. One of them was her father's, low and uneasy. The other was unmistakably Nathaniel's, measured, firm, entirely in control. Eliza slowed, her steps soundless on the polished floor. "A delicate matter," her father was saying. "My daughter is young. She is attached." "Attachment is not uncommon," the Duke replied. "Nor is it insurmountable." Eliza's jaw tightened. "She will need reassurance," her father continued. "This courtship must proceed carefully." "I have no intention of alarming her," the Duke said calmly. "But neither will I permit uncertainty to undermine what has been agreed." There it was. agreement, as though Vivian were a term in a contract rather than a living, feeling person. Eliza stepped forward before she could stop herself. Uncertainty, she said clearly, is the natural consequence of being treated as a transaction. Both men turned sharply. Her father's face drained of color. Eliza, this does not concern you. It concerns my sister, Eliza replied. Which makes it my concern. The Duke studied her, his expression unreadable. You overheard, he observed. I listened, Eliza corrected. There is a difference. Her father opened his mouth, but the Duke raised a hand, halting him. Leave us, Nathaniel said quietly. The command was not harsh, it was absolute. Eliza's father hesitated, pride and fear warring in his eyes. Then he nodded stiffly and withdrew, leaving the door ajar behind him. The silence that followed was heavy. You are persistent, the Duke said at last. I am protective of your sister. Yes, and perhaps, he added slowly, of something else. Eliza stiffened. You mistake me. Do I? He moved closer, not invading her space, but reducing the room between them enough that retreat would have been obvious. You object to this match, he said. Yet you have not once accused me of cruelty. Cruelty is not your failing, Eliza said carefully. Control is. A flicker of something passed across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or something like regret. You assume I am unmoved by her feelings, he said. You assume I have not considered what this demands of her. Then prove me wrong. The challenge hung between them. He exhaled slowly. You speak as though love were the only currency that mattered. Eliza's voice softened. It is the only one that costs this much to ignore. The words seemed to reach him despite himself. You believe I am destroying something precious, he said quietly. I believe, Eliza replied, that you are asking her to bury it alive. He turned away then, pacing the length of the study, hands clasped behind his back. You think this is simple, he said. You think she is being sacrificed for convenience, and she is not. He stopped. No, he said. She is being protected. Eliza laughed, sharp and incredulous. From what? From ruin, he answered. From the very man you think worthy of her. The accusation struck like a slap. You know nothing of him, Eliza said. I know enough, Nathaniel replied. Enough to understand that affection does not equal security, and security does not equal love. They stood in silence again, the weight of unspoken truths pressing in. At last, Nathaniel spoke more quietly. I will not force her, he said. Not in the way you fear. Eliza crossed her arms. And yet you intend to proceed. Yes. Why? He met her gaze fully now, something earnest and unguarded breaking through his composure. Because there are consequences you cannot see, he said, and because stepping aside would not spare her. It would only delay the harm. Eliza searched his face for deception and found none she could name. What are you not telling me? She asked. His jaw tightened. More than you are ready to hear. The door opened then, and Vivian appeared, pale but resolute. I am ready, she said quietly. Both turned to her. Vivian stepped forward, hands clasped tightly. I have listened long enough, she said, and I will not have decisions made over my head any longer. She lifted her chin. This courtship will continue, she said, voice steady, but not in secrecy, not in silence, and not without my consent at every step. Nathaniel inclined his head. Agreed. Eliza's breath caught. Vivian turned to her sister, eyes glistening. I need you, she said. But I need to choose this myself. Eliza nodded slowly, pride and fear warring within her. She took Vivian's hands. Then I will stand beside you, she said, whatever comes. And for the first time since arriving at Ashford Estate, Eliza felt something shift, not resolution, but resistance taking shape, quiet, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. The days that followed unfolded with a precision that felt rehearsed, as though the estate itself were complicit in what was being arranged. Vivian's presence was no longer treated as provisional. Invitations were extended in her name. Introductions were made with subtle emphasis. She was guided, never ordered, into the position expected of her. The Duke's mother oversaw much of this with gracious efficiency, her approval offered in measured glances and carefully chosen remarks. Eliza watched it all with growing unease. Vivian smiled when required, listened when spoken to, and carried herself with a composure that bordered on defiance in its quiet dignity. To an untrained eye, she appeared adaptable, even content. But Eliza saw the strain beneath it. She saw how Vivian's hands trembled slightly before social engagements, how she lingered too long over letters she could no longer openly receive, and she saw how the Duke's attention began to shift, not away from Vivian, toward Eliza. It began subtly, a question directed at Eliza during breakfast rather than Vivian, a comment seeking her opinion on an estate matter, as though her thoughts held weight. A glance held a moment too long, thoughtful rather than appraising. Eliza did not welcome it. She did not trust it, yet she could not deny that it unsettled her in ways she had not anticipated. One afternoon, as rain drove guests indoors and scattered plans across the household, Eliza found herself in the gallery overlooking the eastern grounds. The windows were tall, the view wide and somber beneath the grey sky. It was the kind of place designed for reflection rather than conversation. She did not hear the Duke approach. "You avoid me with admirable consistency," Nathaniel said quietly. Eliza did not turn at once. "I avoid unnecessary complications." He came to stand beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "Am I unnecessary?" he asked. She faced him then. "That depends on whether you intend to complicate matters further." His mouth curved faintly. "You assume I have not already done so." "Have you?" His gaze followed the rain-streaked glass for a moment. "You are changing how this household moves," he said, "how people speak, how decisions are questioned." Eliza's tone sharpened. "If that troubles you, I can remove myself." He shook his head. "No, it does not trouble me." The admission surprised her. "Then what does?" she asked. He hesitated, as though weighing honesty against strategy. "You do," he said at last. The words landed quietly, without drama. Eliza stiffened. "That is unwise." "Yes," he agreed. "It is." She exhaled slowly. "My sister is the one you are meant to court." "I am aware." "Then do not look at me as though I am a problem to be solved." "I do not," he replied. "I look at you as though you are an obstacle I underestimated." Her eyes flashed. "To what?" "To my certainty," he said simply. They stood in silence, the rain tapping steadily against the glass. "You speak as though certainty were a virtue," Eliza said. "In my world it is. And in mine," she replied, "it has always belonged to those who never had to ask permission." Something in her words seemed to strike him deeply. "You believe I have never questioned my position," he said quietly. "I believe you have never been forced to." He turned fully toward her then, his expression serious. "You are wrong," he said. "I question it every day." She studied his face, searching for arrogance, for evasion. She found only restraint. "You do not see the dangers surrounding your sister," he continued. "You see only the injustice, because injustice is what is being done." He nodded. "And yet sometimes injustice is the lesser harm." Eliza's patience frayed. "You keep speaking in riddles, because the truth would not persuade you." "Try." He did not answer at once. Instead, he gestured toward the grounds below. "Do you know how many families would trade places with yours without hesitation?" he asked. "How many daughters would accept what your sister has been offered without protest?" "That does not make it right." "No," he agreed, "but it makes it survivable." Eliza's voice softened despite herself. "Survival is not living." He looked at her then with an intensity that made her breath catch. "And yet," he said, "living without survival is ruin." Their argument lingered unresolved, heavy with unspoken truths. That evening, Eliza found Vivian alone in the sitting room, staring into the hearth long after the fire had burned low. "You've changed," Vivian said without turning. Eliza sat beside her. "So have you." Vivian smiled faintly. "I don't think I had a choice." She hesitated, then spoke more quietly. "He is not unkind," Vivian said. "Not in the ways I feared. I know. And he does listen," Vivian continued. "Sometimes." Eliza did not respond. Vivian turned toward her then, eyes searching. "But he watches you more than he watches me." Eliza's chest tightened. "That means nothing," she said quickly. "It means something," Vivian replied gently. "I have lived long enough among polite silences to recognize them." Eliza looked away. "I will not betray you." "I know," Vivian said. She reached for Eliza's hand. "I just need to know that if this becomes unbearable," she whispered, "you will help me leave." The request was quiet, desperate, and profoundly brave. Eliza squeezed her hand. "I promise." Vivian exhaled shakily. And somewhere deep within the estate, as plans continued and expectations solidified, a dangerous truth began to surface. This was no longer a story of one woman being offered as a solution. It was a story of two lives entangled in a design neither had chosen, and the cost of choosing differently was beginning to reveal itself. The revelation did not arrive with drama. There was no raised voice, no sudden interruption, no moment crafted for spectacle. It came instead in fragments, scattered across an afternoon that had begun with polite normalcy and ended in quiet devastation. Eliza sensed it first in the way the household shifted. Servants moved with greater caution. Conversations halted more abruptly. Vivian was kept closer than before, gently steered away from corridors where chance encounters might occur. Even the Duke's mother, usually composed and distant, began to watch the doors as though expecting trouble to enter unannounced. It was not fear exactly. It was preparation. Eliza found Nathaniel alone in the study just before dusk. He stood by the window, staring out at the darkening grounds as though he were measuring something unseen. "You are keeping something from us," Eliza said without preamble. He did not turn. "Yes." The admission unsettled her more than denial would have. "You promised you would not proceed in silence," she said. "I promised I would not force your sister," he replied calmly. "I did not promise transparency." Her temper flared. "Then your word is worth very little." He faced her then, his expression grave. "My word is the only thing standing between her and something far worse." Eliza's breath caught. "You keep speaking in threats without substance," she said. "If you mean to frighten me." "I mean to prepare you," he interrupted. He crossed the room and gestured for her to sit. She did not. "Then speak," she said. "Or stop pretending this is protection." He studied her for a long moment, as though weighing the cost of truth. "The man your sister loves," he said at last, "is not merely inconvenient." Eliza stiffened. "Do not do this." "He is indebted," Nathaniel continued, "deeply to people who do not negotiate with honor." "That is a lie." "It is a fact." Eliza's heart began to pound. "Caleb Turner has borrowed far beyond his means," Nathaniel said. "He has promised returns he cannot produce, and the men who funded him are growing impatient." Eliza shook her head. "Even if that were true, it does not justify—" "It does," Nathaniel said firmly. when refusal would place Vivian directly in their path. The room seemed to tilt. "You're saying—" Eliza's voice faltered. "I'm saying that if your sister were to marry him," Nathaniel said quietly, "she would inherit his danger, along with his name." Eliza pressed her hands against the back of a chair, steadying herself. "You could have told us," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed, "and you would have dismissed it as manipulation." Her silence confirmed his point. "You still might," he added. She looked up at him, fury and fear warring within her. "So you decided for us?" "I intervened," he corrected, "before it became irreversible." Eliza laughed, brittle and hollow. "You think this absolves you?" "I think," he said carefully, "that it explains me." The door opened softly. Vivian stood there, pale but composed. "I would like to hear this myself," she said. Nathaniel did not object. He repeated everything, this time with fewer words and more care. He did not embellish. He did not accuse. He spoke as one delivering an unpleasant truth rather than a victory. Vivian listened without interruption. When he finished, she did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked, "Is he in danger now?" "Yes," Nathaniel answered, "but not immediate." "And will he be harmed because of me?" "No," he said firmly. "That is precisely what I am preventing." Vivian closed her eyes. "So my choices," she said quietly, "are to marry you or risk destroying the man I love." Eliza reached for her sister's hand, but Vivian did not take it. "This was not mercy," Vivian said, her voice trembling now. "This was a cage lined with silk." Nathaniel did not deny it. "I did not design the world," he said. "I learned how to survive it." Vivian turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth as though to contain the sound rising there. "I need air," she said. "Both of you." She left without waiting for permission. Eliza turned on Nathaniel, her restraint shattered. "You had no right. I had responsibility. You decided her life was negotiable. I decided her safety was not. You used her fear. I used my influence." Her voice broke. "You used her love." Silence fell between them, thick and aching. "I did not want this," he said finally. "Not like this." Eliza stared at him, her eyes burning. "Then why does it feel," she whispered, "like you calculated it anyway?" He did not answer. That night, Eliza did not sleep. She replayed every conversation, every glance, every half-truth. She thought of Caleb's letters, so careful, so hopeful. She thought of Vivian's quiet strength, now cornered by realities she never chose. And she thought of the Duke, not as a villain, but as something more dangerous, a man who believed himself justified. Just before dawn, Eliza made a decision. If the world insisted on forcing choices through fear and silence, then she would confront it openly, even if it meant standing alone, even if it meant confronting a Duke on ground he believed entirely his own. The reckoning was no longer approaching, it had begun. The reckoning did not come in confrontation, it arrived in resolve. Eliza rose before the house stirred, the corridors still heavy with sleep and unspoken tension. She dressed without assistance, choosing a gown plain enough to avoid notice and sturdy enough to carry her where she intended to go. There was no drama in her movements, no urgency that might invite interruption. Only purpose. She did not seek permission. She sought truth. The stables were already awake when she arrived. Grooms moved quietly, preparing horses for the day. Eliza spoke little, only enough to secure a mount and the direction she required. No one questioned her. Perhaps they sensed that questions would be wasted. The road to the village cut through low fields and scattered woods, familiar enough to offer comfort. Eliza rode with steady determination, her thoughts sharp despite the chill morning air. She needed to see him, not the man Vivian loved, but the man the Duke feared. Caleb Turner lived on the edge of respectability, his estate modest but well kept. its prosperity suggested rather than declared. When Eliza arrived, a servant met her with visible surprise, but did not deny her entry. Caleb was in the study when she entered. He looked older than Eliza remembered, not by years, but by weight. His eyes, once quick with warmth, now carried a guarded wariness that hardened when he recognized her. "Miss Hartwell," he said, rising, "you should not be here. Neither should you be burdened with secrets you did not create," Eliza replied. They regarded each other in silence. "You know," he said finally. "I know enough," Eliza said, "but I came to hear it from you." Caleb exhaled slowly and gestured for her to sit. "There is debt," he admitted. "There are men who believe patience is weakness." "And my sister?" Eliza asked. He looked stricken. "I would never allow harm to come to her." "And yet, it already has." He bowed his head. "I made mistakes. Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I thought I could fix it," he said quietly, "and because loving her already felt like trespass enough." Eliza studied him, seeing now the cracks beneath his dignity. "Do you intend to marry her?" she asked. "Yes," he answered without hesitation, "if she will still have me, and if doing so endangered her." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then I would step aside," he said, "no matter the cost." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable. "And would you fight for her safety if given the chance?" Eliza pressed. He met her gaze. "I would sacrifice everything." Eliza stood. "That may be enough," she said, "or it may be too late." She returned to Ashford before dusk, her mind racing. She found Vivian in the gallery, pale but composed. "I saw him," Eliza said. Vivian closed her eyes. "He loves you," Eliza continued. "Enough to let you go if it meant protecting you." Tears finally fell. "That makes this harder," Vivian whispered. "Yes," Eliza agreed. "It always does." That evening, Eliza sought the Duke. Nathaniel was alone in the great hall, reviewing documents by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, his expression guarded. "You went to him," he said. "Yes. Without my knowledge. With my conscience." He rose slowly. "And?" he asked. "He is flawed," Eliza said. "But he is not reckless with her life." Nathaniel's gaze hardened. "Love does not erase debt." "No," Eliza replied, "but fear does not erase agency. You believe you have uncovered something I did not already know." "I believe you underestimated something," Eliza said. "And what is that?" "Her willingness to choose suffering over safety," Eliza answered, "and his willingness to walk away for her sake." Silence stretched between them. "You are gambling with her life," Nathaniel said, "and you are controlling it," Eliza replied. "Neither is certainty." His jaw tightened. "You think this gives you leverage?" "No," Eliza said softly. "It gives me clarity." She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "You did not create this danger," she said, "but you have used it." He did not deny it. "You could help him," Eliza continued. "You have influence, resources, power." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "I could. Then do so. And lose my position in this arrangement." "Yes." His eyes searched hers. "You would ask me to step aside," he said. "I would ask you to stop treating her life as collateral," Eliza replied. He turned away, pacing. "You think I fear losing her," he said. "You think that is why I resist." "Do you?" He stopped. "For the first time," he admitted quietly, "I fear losing something I did not intend to want." The confession stunned her. "Then do not let that fear dictate her future," Eliza said. He faced her again, something resolute forming beneath the conflict. "You place me in an impossible position." "No," she said. "I place you in a moral one." The house felt suddenly too small for the weight of what hung between them. "I will consider your proposal," Nathaniel said at last. "Nothing more." "That is enough," Eliza replied. For now, as she left him standing alone in the lamplight, Eliza felt neither victory nor relief, only the certainty that lines had been drawn, and that whatever came next would demand sacrifice from all of them. The decision, when it came, altered the household in ways no announcement ever could. Nathaniel did not summon them. He did not issue commands or gather witnesses. Instead, he began to act. Letters were written. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Men arrived at the estate, whose presence was not recorded in the social calendar, and whose departures were noted only by the servants, who understood that influence rarely announced itself. Eliza watched from the margins, alert to every shift in tone, every subtle change in routine. Something was unfolding. Vivian sensed it too. She grew quieter, more watchful, as though bracing herself for either release or ruin. The waiting was its own form of punishment. It was the Duke's mother who broke the silence. She invited Vivian and Eliza to tea one afternoon, her tone unremarkable, her manner composed. The sitting room was immaculate, sunlight filtering through lace curtains, casting patterns that softened the severity of the furniture. "You have been patient," the Duchess said once the servants withdrew. "That patience has not gone unnoticed." Vivian inclined her head politely. "There are matters," the Duchess continued, "that require discretion rather than ceremony. My son has chosen to address them directly." Eliza's pulse quickened. "You may soon hear rumors," the Duchess said, "some flattering, some less so. I advise you to listen to none of them." Vivian's hands tightened in her lap. "And my future," the Duchess regarded her steadily, "is no longer being negotiated without you," she said. The words struck with unexpected force. That evening, Nathaniel requested Vivian's presence in the study. Eliza remained behind, her instincts urging her to stay close but not interfere. She paced the gallery, every minute stretching thin. When the door finally opened, Vivian emerged alone. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright with something Eliza had not seen in weeks. "What happened?" Eliza asked. Vivian exhaled shakily. "He told me everything," she said. "About the debts, about the men involved, about what he has done." Eliza's heart raced. "And he settled them," Vivian whispered, "not quietly, not completely without cost, but enough that Caleb is no longer trapped." Eliza closed her eyes, relief washing over her. "And you?" she asked. Vivian swallowed. "He said the courtship would end." Eliza's breath caught. "He released me," Vivian said, "publicly, respectfully. He said it was his decision, not mine." Tears filled her eyes then, spilling freely. "He said I deserved a future chosen freely," Vivian continued, "even if it was not with him." Eliza pulled her into an embrace, her own hands trembling. "And Caleb?" Vivian smiled through tears. "He is free to leave, to rebuild, without fear following him." For the first time since arriving at Ashford, Eliza allowed herself to believe that something had truly changed. But relief did not erase consequence. The household felt different in the days that followed. Quieter, more subdued. Nathaniel withdrew from society, declining invitations, retreating into the responsibilities of his estate. Whispers circulated, carefully framed to protect reputation, but enough to signal that a shift had occurred. Eliza did not see him for several days. When she did, it was by chance. She found him in the gardens at dusk, standing where the hedges opened into shadow. He looked older somehow, the lines of restraint more visible now that certainty no longer shielded him. "You did this," he said without turning. "I asked," Eliza replied. "You chose." "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." She stepped closer. "You did the right thing." He shook his head slightly. "I did the costly thing." She hesitated. Those are often the same. He turned then, studying her with an expression stripped of authority. "You will leave soon," he said. "Yes. And your sister?" "She will return home briefly," Eliza said. "Then she will decide." He nodded once. "There will be talk," he said, "some of it unkind." Eliza met his gaze. "She will survive it." "So will you," he said, his voice low. She frowned. "Why do you say that?" "Because you have changed how I see consequence," he replied, "and consequence changes everything." The admission lingered between them. "I did not act only for her," he added. "That would be dishonest." Eliza's breath caught. "I know," she said softly. They stood in silence as dusk deepened, the air heavy with endings and beginnings entwined. This was not reconciliation, it was recognition, and recognition, Eliza knew, carried its own dangers. As she walked away, she felt the weight of something unresolved pressing at her back, not obligation, not fear, but possibility, fragile, uncertain, and entirely unsanctioned by the world they lived in. Departure did not come with celebration. There were no grand farewells, no speeches meant to preserve dignity through performance. The Hartwell carriage was prepared quietly, its presence noted more by absence than display. Vivian's release from the courtship had been managed with careful diplomacy, but its ripple was undeniable. People noticed. Eliza watched from the window as servants loaded trunks, their movements subdued. Vivian stood nearby, composed but distant, as though she were still convincing herself that freedom was real. "You could stay longer," Vivian said suddenly, without turning. Eliza shook her head. "You need space to decide who you are without interference." Vivian smiled faintly. "And you?" "I need to leave before I mistake resolution for something else." Vivian's gaze softened. "He has not spoken to you again?" "No." "Does that trouble you?" Eliza considered the question. "Yes," she admitted, "and no." They embraced quietly, holding each other longer than custom allowed. When they parted, something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, relief, and the shared knowledge that their bond had been tested and survived. The carriage rolled away beneath a sky heavy with late summer haze. Eliza watched Ashford Estate recede, its stone facade shrinking into memory. She told herself she was relieved. She told herself that distance would restore balance. It did neither. The weeks that followed were restless. At home, life resumed its familiar rhythms, but Eliza felt altered, as though the shape of her days no longer fit her. Conversations felt shallow, expectations felt louder. Letters arrived from Vivian, filled with cautious hope and plans, whispered rather than declared. Caleb's name appeared again, carefully, tenderly. Nothing was promised. Everything was possible. Eliza should have been content. Instead, she found herself thinking of a man who had stepped aside rather than claim what he could have taken. Of a man who had chosen consequence over certainty. The letter arrived in early autumn. It bore the Ashford seal. Eliza held it for a long moment before opening it, as though delay might soften whatever awaited her. The message was brief, formal, and unmistakably personal. He wrote of changes, of responsibilities re-examined, of decisions made in quiet, away from scrutiny. He did not speak of regret. He did not apologize. He asked simply whether she would consent to meet him, without expectation, without audience. Eliza read the letter twice. Then she folded it carefully and set it aside. Days passed. She walked the familiar paths of her childhood, spoke with neighbors, fulfilled duties that had once defined her. Yet the question lingered, persistent and unsettling. Meeting him would mean reopening a chapter she had thought closed. Refusing would mean accepting that her defiance had ended where it began. On the fourth day, Eliza wrote her reply. She agreed. The meeting took place at a modest estate halfway between their homes, neutral ground, chosen with deliberate care. There was no grandeur to it, no staff waiting to observe, only a quiet garden and a late afternoon sun. Nathaniel was already there when she arrived. He looked different, less guarded, less certain, more real. "Thank you for coming," he said. "For honesty," she replied. They walked slowly, neither rushing to fill the silence. "You were right," he said at last, "about more than I was prepared to admit." Eliza did not respond. "I believed control was the same as protection," he continued. "I was wrong." "You were not entirely wrong," Eliza said quietly. "You were incomplete." He nodded. "I have spent my life ensuring outcomes," he said, "never once considering whether the people within them consented. And now I find that certainty no longer satisfies me." They stopped near a low stone wall, the landscape stretching open and unclaimed beyond it. "I did not ask you here to persuade you," he said, "nor to claim anything." She studied him. "Then why?" "Because I could not let what changed go unspoken." Eliza felt her breath catch. "I am not offering a solution," he said. "Only a truth." She met his gaze steadily. "And what truth is that?" "That I respect you," he said, "and that whatever follows must be chosen, not managed." The words settled between them, weighty and sincere. Eliza said nothing for a long moment. Then she spoke softly. "I am not a concession." "I know. I will not be convinced. I would not dare. I will walk away the moment I feel diminished. I would deserve it." A faint smile touched her lips. "Then perhaps," she said, "we may speak again." Hope flickered, not triumph, not promise. Only the fragile beginning of something that had not yet learned how to exist. And for the first time, Eliza did not fear where it might lead. Eliza did not fall in love suddenly. There was no moment she could point to and name as the beginning, no declaration that rearranged her world in a single breath. What followed instead was slower, quieter, and far more unsettling. It began with conversations. Letters arrived at irregular intervals, never demanding, never presuming. Nathaniel wrote with care, choosing restraint where once he had relied on authority. He spoke of his work, of decisions made differently now, of silences he was learning to respect. He did not ask for affection, he asked for understanding. Eliza replied in kind. She wrote honestly, without softening her convictions or disguising her independence. She spoke of her days, of Vivian's cautious happiness, of the strangeness of being seen after years of careful invisibility. She did not offer reassurance. She offered truth. Months passed. Their correspondence grew neither more urgent nor more intimate, yet something unmistakable formed between the lines. A mutual recognition, a shared language built not on expectation, but on consent. When they met again, it was without ceremony. Sometimes in public, where restraint was required, sometimes privately, where silence carried more weight than words. Always with care, always with the understanding that either could withdraw without consequence. Eliza noticed how he listened now, not as a man measuring response, but as one allowing himself to be changed by it. She noticed, too, how she no longer felt the need to brace herself in his presence. The turning point came quietly. They were walking along a river path, the afternoon light slanting low across the water. Nathaniel stopped and turned to her, his expression thoughtful rather than guarded. "I will ask you something," he said, "with the understanding that your answer may be no." Eliza inclined her head. "Proceed. Will you walk forward with me?" he asked, not as a solution and not as an obligation, but as a choice made freely and reconsidered as often as you wish. The question was not romantic in its phrasing, it was respectful. Eliza felt the weight of it settle within her, not as pressure, but as possibility. "Yes," she said after a moment, "I will." The word did not bind her. It liberated her. Their path was not without scrutiny. Society noticed, as it always did. Some approved, others questioned. A few whispered that Eliza had overreached, that she had mistaken defiance for destiny. Eliza did not answer them. She did not need to. Vivian's happiness became steady rather than fragile. Caleb rebuilt his life with patience and humility. The Hartwell family learned slowly that obedience was not the same as harmony, and Nathaniel Ashford changed, not completely, not perfectly, but deliberately. He became a man who asked before he decided, who listened before he acted, who understood that influence carried responsibility not just to outcomes, but to people. Eliza remained herself, observant, uncompromising, quietly strong. She did not lose her voice in loving him. She sharpened it. Their union, when it came, was not framed as triumph. It was framed as partnership. Two individuals choosing, again and again, to meet without erasing themselves. And in that choosing, Eliza discovered something she had never been promised and never expected to claim. Not safety, not certainty, but the dignity of being seen. Some lives are shaped not by the choices offered to us, but by the courage to refuse those made on our behalf. This story is not about defying the world all at once. It is about speaking once, clearly, and allowing that truth to echo until others are forced to listen. Sometimes love does not arrive as rescue. Sometimes it arrives as respect. And sometimes the bravest act is not choosing differently, but insisting that choice itself belongs to you. If this story stayed with you, if it brought comfort or reflection, consider subscribing, liking, or sharing it with someone who may need a quiet reminder that being seen is not a luxury. It is a right.